It had been 9 years since I last saw him. 9 years since I stood on that cold street, watching him walk away without looking back. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear the sound of his footsteps fading. Not loud, not angry, just final, like the closing of a door that was never meant to open again. Life carried on, of course. It always does. I taught my classes, painted when I could, smiled when people expected me to. But somewhere beneath it all, there was always this quiet ache. Not sharp anymore, just a soft echo of something I once believed would last forever. I learned to live with it. I even learned to be happy. But some nights, when I sat by my window and the wind sounded like the sea, I would wonder what he was doing, where he was, if he ever thought of me the way I still thought of him. Then one evening, I saw his name again, an art gallery opening by the coast, photography by Mark Rivers. My breath caught when I read it. The name felt like a whisper from another lifetime, a small ghost calling me back. I almost didn't go. I told myself it would be strange, unnecessary, even selfish. But curiosity and something softer, maybe forgiveness, pulled me there anyway. The gallery was a small and beautiful, filled with golden light and the scent of sea salt that drifted in through the door. His photographs were everywhere. Landscapes, faces, the kind of images that carried silence and longing in every line. And then I saw him. He stood by a frame near the window, fixing the light on a photograph of 2 birds flying apart. His hair was grayer now, his posture more still, but I would have known him anywhere. For a moment I just stood there, frozen, watching the man who had once known every secret part of me. And before I could stop myself, I said quietly, "Still chasing the light?" He turned. When his eyes met mine, the years between us fell away. The gallery, the people, the noise, all of it disappeared. There was only him, and the memory of who we used to be. He smiled faintly, that same gentle smile that once made me believe in forever. "Emma," he said, "just my name." And somehow it was enough to bring tears to my eyes. We talked for a while, awkward at first, like strangers pretending not to recognize each other's ghosts. But slowly the distance softened. He asked if I still painted, and I told him yes. That art was the only thing that kept me from losing myself. He said I hadn't changed, and I wanted to believe him, but I knew we both had. There was a bench near the window, and we sat there, watching the ocean shimmer beneath the evening light. For a long time we didn't speak. We didn't need to. There was peace in just existing beside each other again. Finally I said, "I used to walk past your house sometimes, the one with the blue shutters. It looked empty." He looked down, his voice low. It was. I felt something twist inside me. Regret, maybe. Or grief for all the words we never said. "I wanted to write to you," I whispered. "But I thought it would only make things worse." He gave a small smile. "Maybe, or maybe it would have helped." We both laughed softly at that, and it felt almost like before, the way we could find warmth even inside pain. He told me about his gallery, his travels, the life he built from pieces of what he'd lost. I told him about my students, about the way art changed with time, how my hands sometimes trembled when I painted. We spoke like 2 old friends who once loved each other in a different lifetime. At one point I asked him, "Do you ever think we met too early? That we had to break each other before we could become who we were meant to be?" He didn't answer right away, but when he finally looked at me, his eyes said everything words couldn't. When the evening began to fade, people started leaving. The soft hum of conversation turned into silence. I stood up, brushing my coat, suddenly aware that this was goodbye. Again, but differently. "I'm glad I came," I said quietly. "I wanted to see you happy, and you are." He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that holds both peace and sadness. Thank you, Emma, for everything. I stepped closer, placed my hand gently on his arm. Take care of your light, I whispered. The same words I used to tell him when he doubted himself. Then I walked out, into the night. Outside, the sky was painted with stars. I breathed in the salt air and felt a strange kind of calm wash over me. It wasn't the joy of reunion or the ache of parting. It was something quieter, deeper. Acceptance. As I walked, I thought about those two birds in his photograph, flying apart yet still under the same sky, and I realized that maybe that's what love really is. Not a forever promise, but a shared moment that changes you. One that keeps existing, even when you've both moved on. Years of pain, longing, silence. And still, a tenderness remained. I smiled to myself, whispering into the wind. Thank you for loving me once. And then, I kept walking, lighter, freer, like a story finally finding its ending. It had been 3 months since I saw him again. 3 months since the gallery. Since that quiet goodbye beneath the golden light of evening. At first, I thought the ache would return. That old, familiar emptiness that used to haunt me. But instead, what I felt was something new. Peace. It was strange, really. After years of longing and guilt and wondering, I finally understood what it meant to let someone go without losing them entirely. He was still there. Not in the way he used to be, but in the small, invisible ways that love leaves behind. Sometimes when I painted, I would find his reflection in the color blue, or when I walked along the cliffs near the sea, I'd see the same light he used to chase with his camera. Soft, golden, fleeting. It made me smile, even when it hurt. One evening in early winter, I came home from my art class to find a parcel waiting at my doorstep. No name, no return address, just a simple brown envelope, tied with twine. Inside there was a letter and a photograph. The photograph showed the sea at dawn, pale light breaking over the waves. It looked familiar, like the coast near my old town. But what caught my eye wasn't the sea. It was a small figure standing in the distance, barely visible, facing the horizon. And then I read the letter. It was written in his handwriting. Neat. Calm. The way he always wrote when he was trying to keep his feelings under control. Emma, I didn't know if I should write this. After the gallery, I thought maybe silence was the kindest thing we could give each other. But as I walked along the shore yesterday, I realized that some stories aren't meant to end in silence. I wanted to thank you for being the beginning of everything I became, for believing in me before I ever did. Every photograph I take now, every ray of light I chase, it still begins with the way you once looked at the world. I hope your art keeps growing, and that when you paint, you remember you were never the one who needed fixing. You were the light. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. The words were simple, but they carried years of truth. All the things we couldn't say back then. All the apologies that had waited too long to be spoken. That night, I went to my studio and stared at a blank canvas. For months, I hadn't been able to finish a single painting. Every brushstroke felt like a memory I wasn't ready to touch. But now, as I read his letter again, something inside me softened. I dipped my brush into blue, the same shade as the sea in his photograph, and began to paint. Slowly, layer by layer, the image came to life. A horizon, a faint figure standing at the edge, light spilling across the water like forgiveness. I painted through the night, and for the first time in years, I didn't cry. I just painted. When dawn came, I stepped back and looked at what I'd made. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even finished. But it was honest. It was us. Not as lovers, not as what could have been, but as two souls who found peace in their distance. A few weeks later, I decided to display that painting in my next exhibition. I titled it The Horizon Between Us. People asked me what it meant. I told them, It's about two people who learned that love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means letting each other walk toward their own light. The exhibition was quiet, but beautiful, and near the end of the evening, as I was packing up, I noticed an old camera placed gently on the table beside the guest book. No note this time, just the camera. Inside it, one undeveloped roll of film. I smiled. I didn't need to know more. Some things are meant to remain half-told. Beautiful precisely because they never reach an ending. I placed the camera beside my easel that night, near the painting of the horizon. Every morning, when sunlight spills through the curtains, it hits the lens first. And for a second, I feel as if he's still there, capturing the light just as he always did. And sometimes, when I walk by the sea, I whisper his name, not in longing but in gratitude, because love, I've learned, doesn't vanish. It changes form. It becomes the warmth in your chest when you think of someone who once knew your soul better than anyone. It becomes art and silence and peace. And that, I think, is how all great stories end, not in tears, but in light. It was spring when I went back to the seaside town, the same one where we'd first met, the same one where the sky always seemed to stretch a little wider, as if it remembered something the rest of the world had forgotten. I hadn't planned to return, but one morning, I woke up with the sound of the sea echoing in my dreams, and I knew I had to go. Not for him, not even for closure, but for myself. The train ride was long and quiet. Outside the window, the fields shifted from gold to green. Villages passed like old memories. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from the past. I was walking toward it, calmly, as one might return to a place that once held both pain and beauty. When I arrived, everything felt smaller. The streets, the houses, even the sky. But the sea was the same, endless, patient, unchanged. I stayed at a small inn near the harbor. The woman there recognized me. "You used to come here," she said with a smile, "with a man who carried a camera everywhere." I smiled back, quietly. Yes, that was a long time ago. That night I walked down to the beach. The tide was low, and the air smelled of salt and wildflowers. I took off my shoes and stepped into the cool sand, letting the wind brush against my face. The memories came back, not as sharp as before. Gentler, like old songs playing softly in another room. I remembered the way he used to stand with his camera, waiting for the perfect light. The way he'd ask me to stay still, just for a moment, so he could capture the way the sunset touched my hair. I closed my eyes and smiled, whispering into the wind, "You'd like it tonight. The light's perfect." As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A small cafe near the edge of the pier. It had been closed for years, but now it looked newly painted, the windows cleaned. Above the door, a wooden sign read, "Aurora." It was the name we once said we'd give our dream gallery, if we ever built one together. My heart started to race. I stepped closer, peering through the window. Inside there were photographs hanging on the walls, all of them of the sea, the cliffs, the horizon. His work. I knew it instantly. I pushed the door open. A small bell chimed above me. The place was empty but warm. On the counter, beside a vase of fresh lilies, lay a guest book and a single envelope with my name on it. I hesitated before opening it, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a note, short, simple, written in the same familiar handwriting. "I knew you'd come back here one day. This cafe wasn't just a dream, Emma. It was a promise. I opened it last year before I left for my last trip. The doctors said it might be time to slow down, but I couldn't. Not before I finished this. Aurora isn't just mine. It's ours. The light, the art, the silence. They belong to both of us. There's a small room upstairs. I left something for you there." My breath caught in my throat. My hands shook as I walked toward the staircase at the back. Each step felt like walking deeper into a memory. I wasn't sure I could bear. The door upstairs creaked open slowly. The room was filled with paintings and photographs. Of me. Not portraits exactly, but moments. My hands covered in paint, my hair tied back in the sunlight, my reflection in the sea, and in the center of the room, on an easel, was one unfinished painting. It was of a woman standing at the edge of the water, facing the horizon, the same as my last painting, the horizon between us. Only this time, beside her stood another figure, holding a camera. I pressed a hand to my mouth, tears slipping down my cheeks. It was as if he'd painted the ending I never had the courage to. Next to the easel was an old wooden box. Inside I found another letter, and beneath it, a small seashell, the same one we'd picked up together on the beach years ago. Emma, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't wait to see the sea again. Don't be sad. I've had the light I was looking for, and it was always you. Please keep painting. Keep loving the world the way you do. You once told me that art lives longer than people. I believe that now. Every time someone looks at your paintings, every time the waves crash against this shore, we'll still be here. Somewhere between the sea and the light. M. I sat there for hours, reading the words again and again, until the ink blurred through my tears. When I finally stepped outside, the sun was setting. The sea was calm, golden, endless. I stood at the edge of the pier, holding the shell in my hand, and whispered, "You found it, didn't you? The perfect light." The wind lifted softly around me, almost like an answer. I didn't cry anymore. I just smiled. That quiet, peaceful kind of smile that comes when grief and love finally learn to live together. And as the sky turned crimson and the first stars appeared, I realized something. Some stories don't end with goodbye. They end when you finally understand that the people you lose never truly leave. They live on, in color, in sound, in silence. The next morning, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a soft mist that clung to the windows like breath on glass. I stood there for a long time, watching droplets slide down the pane, tracing the same paths again and again, as if they too were trapped in a loop of memories they couldn't escape. Something about the silence of that hour felt heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. That same fleeting smile, the look in his eyes before he walked away. It wasn't love, not the kind that breaks you open. It was something quieter, deeper, and more mysterious. I made myself a cup of tea, wrapping my hands around the warmth as if it could fill the emptiness inside me. The house was quiet. Even the ticking clock sounded distant. I wondered if he was awake somewhere, thinking about that night too. Later that day, I found myself walking down the same street where it all began, where I first met him. The cafe was open again, the familiar hum of chatter spilling through the door. But something had changed. The world felt slower, like it had been rearranged while I wasn't looking. I sat at our usual table, the one by the window, and ordered the same coffee I had the first night. The barista didn't recognize me, but I remembered every detail. The smell of roasted beans, the sound of rain tapping on the glass, the faint music playing in the background. It was strange how memories could become ghosts, invisible, but always present. I took out my notebook and began to write. I didn't know what I was trying to say. Maybe I was just trying to find myself again between the lines. Words flowed like confession, like healing. I wrote about how sometimes people enter your life not to stay, but to remind you of what it means to feel alive again. Hours passed. The sunlight began to fade, turning golden and then soft pink. The cafe grew quiet, and for a moment I thought I saw him again. A familiar figure outside the window, standing in the fading light. My heart raced, but when I blinked, he was gone. I smiled to myself, closing the notebook. Maybe he was never meant to stay. Maybe he was meant to leave a mark. Not on my skin, but on my soul. As I walked home that evening, the mist returned, and I let it cling to my face. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel heavy. It felt gentle. When I woke up the next morning, the world outside my window felt oddly quieter than usual. The rain from last night had stopped, leaving behind a thin silver mist that clung to the trees like unspoken memories. The smell of wet earth drifted in, mixing with the faint aroma of coffee I had left half-finished on the bedside table. Everything felt suspended, like life had taken a small pause, waiting for me to decide which direction it should go next. I sat there for a long time staring at the cup, thinking about how strange it is that something as ordinary as coffee could carry the weight of so many mornings. The ones filled with laughter, the ones haunted by silence, and the ones where I just wanted to disappear. That day, I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want to meet anyone. I only wanted to be with myself. Not the version people saw, not the one that pretended everything was fine, but the one who still trembled inside whenever old memories returned. Sometimes, I think healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live with what you remember. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old messages. His name's still there, frozen in the chat list like a bookmark from another life. I didn't open them. I didn't have to. I knew every word by heart. His voice still lived somewhere between those lines. The laughter, the care, the arguments, the apologies that came too late. And yet, a part of me missed it all. Not him, maybe, but the version of myself that existed when he was around. The girl who believed love could fix anything, who thought being understood was enough to hold someone forever. As the day went on, I decided to step outside. The streets were wet, reflecting pieces of the sky like broken glass. I walked without purpose, past the old bookstore, the park bench we used to sit on, the little cafe with the crooked sign. Everything looked the same, yet felt completely different. The cafe door chimed as I entered, and the familiar scent of cinnamon and roasted beans wrapped around me. I sat in the corner where the light fell just softly enough to make everything feel distant. The same waiter smiled, maybe recognizing me, maybe not. I ordered his favorite drink out of habit, even though I didn't really want it. It's strange, isn't it? How our habits remember people even when our hearts try to forget them. As I sat there, I overheard two women at the next table, talking about time, about how people change, about second chances. Their conversation wasn't meant for me, but their words found their way in. I started to wonder, maybe we don't ever lose people completely. Maybe they just become lessons disguised as memories. The rain started again, tapping gently against the window. I watched as the drops chased each other down the glass, merging and parting, just like people do. That's when I realized something quietly profound. Maybe love isn't about holding on. Maybe it's about knowing when to let someone go, and still wishing them peace. I reached for my journal, the one I hadn't touched in months, and began to write. Not to him, not even about him, but to myself. About how I had forgotten the sound of my own laughter. About how I had let my reflection fade behind someone else's shadow. About how I wanted to start over, even if I didn't know where to begin. As I wrote, I felt something shift. A release. Gentle, invisible, but real. I wrote until the cafe grew dim, and the city lights outside began to glow. I wrote until my heart stopped trembling. When I finally stepped outside, the night air wrapped around me like a quiet friend. The world was still wet, but it smelled of new beginnings. I walked home slowly, my steps lighter than before. That night, I stood by the window again, looking at the stars. Tiny, distant lights scattered across the sky. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. I felt connected to everything, to everyone who had ever loved and lost, to every heart that had broken and learned to beat again. Maybe that's what life is. Not about finding someone who stays forever, but about finding yourself every time someone leaves. I smiled. A small, real smile, and whispered softly to the universe, "Thank you for letting me learn." And in that moment I knew healing had begun. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to start again. The next morning arrived wrapped in a faint gold light. The city was still half asleep, and everything outside my window shimmered with the soft stillness that only early hours carry. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while, watching the curtains move gently with the breeze, thinking about how a new day never promises to fix what's broken, but it quietly offers another chance to begin again. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and opened the small balcony door. The air smelled of wet soil and jasmine. It reminded me of my childhood, of mornings when my mother would water the plants before anyone else woke up, humming songs that carried hope without even trying. I closed my eyes and tried to hum that tune, but it came out shaky, like my heart was still learning how to sing again. I didn't know why, but something inside me told me to go for a walk. Maybe it was the silence that pushed me. Maybe it was the weight of the memories that still lingered in corners of my mind. I didn't take my phone. I just stepped out, letting the morning air wrap around me like a gentle hand. The streets were empty except for a few shopkeepers setting up their stalls. The world felt softer when no one was watching. I walked slowly, passing by the same park where I once used to meet him. But I didn't stop this time. I just looked at the old bench from a distance and smiled faintly. Some places stop hurting when we finally accept that they're just places, not prisons for memories. As I turned the corner, I noticed a small art gallery I had never seen before. The signboard said, "Open Hearts Exhibition." Something about the name made me pause. Without thinking, I went inside. It was quiet. Walls lined with paintings that looked like fragments of emotion turned into color. There was one that caught me immediately. A single figure standing in the rain, holding a broken umbrella, yet smiling as if the storm didn't matter. I stared at it for a long time. Somehow, it felt like the painting was looking back at me, telling me it understood everything I hadn't said out loud. A voice behind me broke the silence. "It's called After the Rain. The artist painted it right after losing someone she loved." I turned around and saw a man, maybe in his early 30s, gentle eyes, a quiet presence. He wasn't the kind of person who filled silence. He respected it. We talked for a while, first about the painting, then about everything else that seemed to flow naturally, the way strangers sometimes do when they don't expect to meet. His name was Daniel. He wasn't trying to impress me, and that was what made him feel real. He told me he had lost his father recently, and painting was his way of keeping memories alive. We spoke about grief, love, and how strange it is that life moves on even when we don't feel ready. When I left the gallery, I felt lighter, not because I had met someone new, but because I had met someone who understood. Sometimes connection doesn't arrive wrapped in romance. It arrives as quiet empathy. That evening I found myself writing again, not about him, not about the past, but about the present, about Daniel's calm voice, about the way the morning light had felt, about how healing doesn't always come from forgetting, but from understanding. Over the next few weeks, I visited the gallery often. Sometimes he was there, sometimes not. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we just stood silently before the paintings. Each time I discovered a new part of myself I hadn't met before. One day, he asked, "Do you ever think some people come into our lives just to remind us that we still have the capacity to feel?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him and smiled, because I knew exactly what he meant. But life, in its strange way, doesn't move in straight lines. A month later, he told me he was leaving, moving to another city to work on a new art project. It wasn't a goodbye heavy with promises. It was quiet, simple, like two souls acknowledging that timing isn't always the enemy. Sometimes it's just the path we're meant to walk separately. After he left, I kept visiting the gallery, The paintings stayed, but something inside them felt different now, as if they had absorbed the memory of our conversations. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I started writing regularly, sharing little pieces of my thoughts online, about healing, love, and how time transforms pain into poetry. I didn't expect anyone to read them, but people did. Strangers wrote back, telling me how my words helped them through lonely nights. I realized then that pain, when shared, can become a bridge instead of a wall. One night, while writing, I looked at the sky and whispered, "Maybe we don't meet people by accident. Maybe every soul we cross paths with leaves a fingerprint on the story we become." And I knew. I wasn't the same woman I once was. I was softer, wiser, and less afraid of endings. Because endings, I had learned, are often just quiet beginnings in disguise. The next morning, I walked to the same cafe, ordered my favorite drink this time, not his, and smiled when I noticed someone reading one of my posts on their phone. The world had quietly come full circle, and I was finally living again. Not in the shadow of what I lost, but in the light of what I found within myself. And as I left the cafe, a little piece of paper flew across the street and landed at my feet. On it, in faded handwriting, were the words, "After the rain, the sun always remembers to shine." I folded it gently, tucked it into my journal, and whispered, "I know." That small piece of paper stayed with me for days. I kept it folded between the pages of my journal, like a secret I wasn't ready to let go of. Every time I opened it, I felt something stir inside me. A strange combination of peace and longing, like the soft ache that comes after a beautiful song ends. Life went on quietly. The city changed its moods as it always did. Some days bright, others heavy with clouds. I learned to move with it, not against it. I started teaching writing workshops at a small community center nearby. I didn't plan to. It just happened one day when someone who had read my words online reached out and asked if I could help others find their voice, too, standing in front of a room full of people who carried stories inside them. Stories they were too afraid to tell. I realized how deeply we are all connected by silence. Everyone hides something behind their smiles. Everyone has a page they've never read out loud. One woman in the group, her eyes tired but kind, said, "Sometimes I write because I don't have anyone to talk to." And I smiled and said, "That's exactly when writing becomes most real." Those sessions began to fill my days. I started to look forward to them. The rawness, the laughter, the quiet moments when someone's truth finally found the courage to surface. I watched people transform in front of me, and in helping them, I began to heal a little more too. But healing is rarely a straight path. One evening after class, as I walked home, I passed by the art gallery again. It was closed, but the lights inside were still glowing faintly. Through the glass, I could see new paintings hanging on the walls. Brighter ones this time. For a moment, I wondered if Daniel had returned. I almost walked away, but something made me stop. I pressed my hand against the cold glass and whispered, "I hope you're okay." The next morning, I found an email. It was from him. He wrote, "I saw your post about the rain and the sun. You still write the way you feel, raw and real. I'm glad you're sharing it with the world. I'm coming back next week for the new exhibition. I'd like to see you, if you'd want that." I must have read it a dozen times before I could breathe again. I didn't know what to feel. Excitement, fear, maybe both. The kind of fear that comes when you realize something unfinished might return, when you've just learned to live without it. When the day finally came, I walked into the gallery again, my heart beating quietly but hard. The place looked different now, fuller, alive, painted with colors that didn't ache anymore. And there he was, standing near one of his new paintings, a vast sunrise breaking over an ocean. He looked at me and smiled, not the kind of smile that asks for anything, but the kind that simply says, "I remember." We talked for hours, about the past months, about art, about everything. And nothing. He told me how leaving had been necessary for him to rediscover who he was. I told him how staying had helped me do the same. Then he said something I didn't expect. Do you ever think we meet people at the wrong time? But maybe it's still the right time for the lesson we needed? I nodded, because deep down, I knew he was right. That evening, he invited me to see one of his new paintings. The one he hadn't displayed yet. It was in the back room, covered by a white sheet. He pulled it off slowly, and I stood there, breath caught in my chest. It was me, or at least it was his version of me, sitting by a window, writing, surrounded by light. But the detail that struck me most was the small folded paper resting beside the journal in the painting, the same one that said, "After the rain, the sun always remembers to shine." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel tears building, not from sadness, but from something too full to contain. "I painted it the day I left," he said quietly, "because even then, I knew you'd find your light, again." Something in me softened completely. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Sometimes silence says everything that words can't. We walked out together. The night was clear, stars scattered like tiny candles in a velvet sky. We didn't talk about the future. We didn't need to define what we were or weren't. Some connections are too gentle to be labeled. Over the next few months, we kept seeing each other. Not every day, not even every week. But when we did, it felt easy. No expectations, no wounds waiting to reopen. Just two people who had learned to meet each other where peace lived. He once said, "I used to think love meant holding on. Now I think it's about letting someone be entirely themselves and still choosing to stay near them when it feels right." I never forgot that. Time passed softly. Seasons changed. I kept teaching, writing, living. The city no longer felt lonely. It felt like a quiet companion. I still visited the cafe sometimes, still kept that folded paper in my journal. One late evening, I was preparing notes for my class when I got a small parcel in the mail. Inside was a framed painting, the same one of me by the window, but smaller, delicate, with a note attached. It said, "Keep shining. The world needs your light." I placed it on my writing desk. Every morning after that, it greeted me as I began to write. And somehow, I started to believe that maybe we never truly lose the people who change us. Maybe they stay, not in the same form, not always beside us, but in the quiet ways our hearts grow after them. Years later, when I published my first book, I dedicated it with a single line. "For the souls who reminded me that even after the rain, the sun never forgets." When I stood before an audience at the book launch, I looked up from the podium and saw him, standing quietly at the back of the room, smiling. Our eyes met for just a moment, but that moment was enough. It said everything: gratitude, closure, peace. Afterward, as I stepped outside, the sky began to drizzle softly. The same kind of gentle rain that once carried my tears now felt like a blessing. I turned my face upward and laughed, freely, fully, because I finally understood. Life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It just keeps moving, gently pulling us toward the next sunrise. And as I walked home under that soft rain, I whispered to myself, I am still here. I am still becoming. And the world, in its quiet way, whispered back, yes, you are. Years later, when the noise of ambition began to fade from my life, I realized how quiet happiness could truly be. It wasn't in the applause after a book launch, nor in the letters from readers who said my words healed them. Though those things touched me deeply, it was in the slow mornings, the smell of tea, the feeling of sunlight spilling across my desk. It was in the rhythm of ordinary days, soft, unhurried, and real. The world outside had changed again. Cities grew louder, people faster, hearts heavier. But inside I carried a calmness I once thought impossible. It came not from forgetting the past, but from finally understanding it. Sometimes when I taught my writing students, I'd watch their faces as they spoke about lost love, betrayal, hope, and forgiveness. I saw in them the same ache I once carried, and every time I told them gently, "The wound is not the end of your story. It's the place where the light can finally enter." There was one student in particular. Her name was Lila. She reminded me of my younger self. Thoughtful, full of dreams, afraid of being too much and not enough at the same time. One afternoon after class, she stayed behind. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. "Of course." "Do we ever really stop missing someone we once loved?" Her question hung in the air like smoke. I thought of Daniel, of the painting, of the rain, the sun, the paper, the years that had passed like pages turned slowly. "No," I finally said. "We don't stop missing them. But one day, missing them doesn't hurt. It just becomes a quiet gratitude for what was and for what helped you grow." She smiled, though her eyes glistened. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "It's also true," I said. After she left, I stayed in the empty classroom for a long while, staring at the old wooden desks, the scribbles on the walls, the faint smell of chalk and paper. The past and the present often meet in such small, quiet places. Later that week, I received another letter. It came without a return address, written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Steady, familiar, gentle. It was from Daniel. He wrote, "I've been living by the coast these past few years. There's a small studio near the water. I paint at sunrise and think of that day at the gallery. I don't know if you'll ever come this way, but if you do, there's always a chair by the window waiting for you." I folded the letter and placed it next to the old note in my journal. My heart didn't race this time. It simply smiled, because life had taught me that some invitations aren't meant to be answered, only felt. Still, a few months later, I found myself traveling to the coast. I told no one. I just packed a small bag, boarded a train, and let the landscape change around me. The world outside the window blurred into greens and golds. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was returning to something I hadn't yet named. When I arrived, the air smelled of salt and rain. The sea stretched endlessly before me. Calm, ancient, knowing. I followed the small cobblestone path that led to a white cottage facing the waves. He was there, older, softer around the edges, but still unmistakably him. His hair had streaks of silver now, his hands paint-stained as always. He looked up, surprised but not startled. That night I couldn't sleep. The storm that had passed outside had left something restless inside me, like the wind had crept in through the cracks and was now swirling around my heart. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, the man from the old photograph I'd found in the attic. His gaze had felt too familiar, as if it reached across time and space to whisper something I wasn't ready to hear. By morning, I decided to return to the attic. The house was still quiet, wrapped in the aftertaste of rain. Each step up the creaky staircase felt heavier than before, as though I was walking not just toward a room, but into a memory that wasn't mine. The light coming through the small window had turned soft, golden, and it fell exactly on the old trunk I had opened the night before. I sat down in front of it, heart beating fast, and pulled out the things I hadn't looked at yet. More letters, some faded cloth, a small silver locket with initials I couldn't quite read. When I opened the locket, there was a tiny photograph inside. The woman looked like me. Not just a vague resemblance, but me. Same eyes, same curve of lips, even the same little birthmark near the temple. For a long moment, I just sat there, feeling the air grow colder. It didn't make sense. The photo was old, maybe from the 1930s or 40s. How could she look exactly like me? I searched the trunk for a clue. Underneath a stack of letters tied with blue ribbon, I found a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned cursive. "To whoever finds this, The house remembers. So do we. No name, no date. Just that haunting message. That day I couldn't eat. Couldn't think of anything else. I felt drawn to the nearby village like I might find answers there. So after lunch, I wrapped my scarf around my neck and walked the winding path downhill. The village was small. Stone cottages, a bakery, a little shop selling candles and postcards. An old woman sitting outside her store looked up as I passed and called out, "You're from the manor, aren't you?" I nodded. She squinted, studying my face. "You look just like her." "Like who?" I asked, my heart skipping. "The lady who used to live there before the war. Strange, isn't it? You could be her twin. She vanished one night. Never found her body." The words made me freeze. "What was her name?" "Evelyn," she said slowly. "Evelyn Hart." I'd never heard the name before, yet it sent a chill through me. Hart. The same name carved faintly into the locket's back. I thanked the woman and walked back home, the name echoing in my head. Evelyn Hart. The house remembers. So do we. That night I dreamed. I was standing in front of the manor, but it was brighter, alive. Music floated through the open windows. Laughter filled the air. I was wearing a long silk dress, my hands covered in lace gloves. A man turned toward me, the same one from the photograph, and whispered, "Evelyn, you shouldn't have come back." I woke up gasping. My hands were cold, trembling. But worse, I could still smell the faint trace of lilac perfume that wasn't mine. Days passed, but I couldn't stay away from the attic. Something kept pulling me back like a tide. I started reading the letters carefully. Most were love letters, signed with the initials TH. They spoke of meeting in secret, of promises, of something forbidden. One letter, dated April 12th, 1941, said, "If they find out, they'll never forgive us. But I can't let you go. If the world ends tomorrow, I'll still come for you. Tay." The ink had blurred at the edges, as though tears had once fallen there. Who was T? And what had they done that was unforgivable? That evening I took a walk through the woods behind the manor. The trees there were ancient, their branches twisted like hands frozen mid-reach. As I wandered deeper, I noticed a clearing I'd never seen before. In its center stood a stone cross, half buried in moss. I knelt to read the inscription, "In memory of Evelyn Hart, 1918 and 1941. Gone, but not forgotten." My breath caught. She had died. But if she was buried here, why did her presence still linger? Why did I see her face in dreams? And in the mirror? Suddenly I felt something brush past me. A whisper, soft and urgent. "Find him!" I turned sharply, but no one was there. Only the trees, sighing in the wind. Back inside the manor, I stood before the mirror in my room. My reflection seemed different. The shadows fell oddly. My eyes looked older, sadder. For a fleeting second, it wasn't me staring back. It was her. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. "What do you want?" I whispered, no answer. But the mirror fogged, as if from a hidden breath, and faint letters formed on the glass. He never left. That night, thunder rolled again across the hills. I couldn't tell if it was the storm outside or the one building inside me, but I knew something in this house was alive, waiting for its story to be finished. And somehow, I was the one meant to finish it. The storm lasted all night. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the branches lash against the glass, the wind howling like it carried the voices of the past. The house groaned and sighed around me, wooden bones creaking under the weight of memory. When dawn came, it was gray and cold. The light felt heavy, almost reluctant to enter the room. I brewed a cup of tea, my hands trembling slightly as I stared at the fog swirling outside. The words on the mirror haunted me. He never left. Who was he? TH? The man from the letters? And if he never left, where was he now? The air in the manor had grown thick in the past days. Not in a physical way, but in feeling. As if every breath I took was borrowed from another time. Every corridor whispered. Every door seemed to hesitate before opening. I began to hear faint music sometimes. A piano playing from somewhere deep within the house. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but one evening, as I followed the faint melody, it grew clearer, soft, melancholic, like a love song slowed by grief. The sound came from the east wing, a part of the manor I had never dared to explore. The door was swollen with age, its paint cracked. When I pushed it open, a gust of cold air brushed past my face. Inside was a long hall lined with portraits. I recognized Evelyn instantly. Her painted eyes followed me as I walked. The resemblance was uncanny. Not just the face, but the expression, the quiet sadness behind her smile. At the end of the hall stood a grand piano covered in dust, yet the keys were moving, gently, one after another, as though invisible hands were still playing. I stood frozen, my heart racing. "Evelyn," I whispered. The music stopped. Silence filled the hall, deeper than before. Then the lid of the piano creaked open by itself. Inside, resting on the yellowed ivory keys, was a single folded letter. My fingers trembled as I opened it. "My dearest E, I cannot forgive myself for what I have done. If they come for me tonight, I will not resist. But know this, I loved you, even when it became impossible to love anything else. The truth is buried where the stars cannot see, and one day someone will find it." That the letter was dated the same night she supposedly vanished. April 14th, 1941. I sank into the old armchair near the window, clutching the letter to my chest. Tears stung my eyes, though I didn't understand why. It wasn't my grief, but it felt like it. It was as if her pain had seeped into me. Her memories, her loss, her unfinished story. That night I dreamt again. This time it was clearer. I was standing in the same hall, but it was alive again. Candles flickering, laughter echoing. A man stood by the piano, his eyes a deep hazel, his hands calloused but gentle. He smiled when he saw me. "Evelyn," he whispered, "we don't have much time." He pressed something small into my hand, a key, ornate and silver. Then the sound of footsteps, heavy, hurried. "They're coming," he said urgently. "Hide this. Promise me." I woke up gasping, clutching my blanket, and my hand was cold. When I looked down, I froze. There, resting against my palm, was a small silver key. It was impossible, yet it was real, solid, cold, intricately carved. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. Instead, I sat still for a long time, staring at it under the pale light. The next day, I searched the manor for anything the key could open. Drawers, cabinets, closets, nothing fit. Finally, I remembered something. The cellar door. It had always been locked. The iron latch rusted shut. I went down the narrow stairs, my flashlight flickering against damp walls. The air smelled of earth and stone, heavy with age. I tried the key. It slid in perfectly. The door creaked open, revealing a space I had never seen before. It wasn't just a cellar. It was a hidden room. Candles melted into puddles on the floor, a table covered in dust, and on it, a leather-bound journal. I brushed off the dust and opened it. It was Evelyn's handwriting. April 10, 1941. "I fear they know. Father has forbidden me to see Thomas again. He says it will ruin the family's name. But how can love ruin anything? April 12th. We met by the river last night. He wants us to run away. I want to believe it's possible, but this house, it holds me. It always has. April 14th. There's someone watching. I can feel it. If anything happens to me, the truth is here." The last entry ended abruptly. A dark stain spread across the bottom of the page. I closed the book, my hands shaking. As I turned to leave, I noticed something behind the shelf. A loose panel of wood. I pried it open and found a small wooden box. Inside was a photograph of Evelyn and Thomas together, smiling, arms around each other. I barely remember how long I sat there, staring at the cracked mirror and the pendant lying cold in my hand. The house had gone silent again, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of breath held before a confession. as though every wall was waiting for me to understand something it had known for decades. I turned the pendant over in my palm again, Thomas Hart. The letters were faint but carved with care, almost lovingly. The more I stared, the more the room seemed to dissolve around me. The air grew thin, the light dimmed, and suddenly I was seeing flashes of firelight, of rain on stone, of someone running down a hall, crying out a name that wasn't mine. Then the sound, a gunshot, sharp, echoing, final. I gasped and fell back, the pendant clattering to the floor. The vision was gone, but the ringing in my ears remained. I knew now that I couldn't leave until I understood everything. This wasn't just Evelyn's unfinished story. Somehow, it was mine too. Over the next 2 days, I searched deeper than ever before. Behind the library shelves, under the loose boards in the floor, inside the walls that groaned when I touched them. The house resisted at first. Every locked drawer, every sealed box. But then, strangely, things began to open, as if it wanted to be heard. In the study, I found an old safe hidden behind a portrait. The key from before didn't fit, but as I turned it over in my hands, I realized the pendant's back wasn't solid. It was hollow. Inside, hidden behind the thin silver lining, was another smaller key. When I tried it on the safe, it clicked open. Inside were letters bound by a red ribbon, fragile with age. They were from Evelyn's father, addressed to someone named Inspector G. Milton. Mr. Milton, I trust you will handle the matter discreetly. The girl has disgraced our name. The young man will not be missed. There must be no trace of them, or of the scandal. My blood ran cold. He hadn't just disapproved of her love. He had arranged their disappearance. And then, at the bottom of the safe, I found one last envelope. Inside was a death certificate, unfiled, unsigned, for Thomas Hart, dated April 15th, 1941. Cause of death, unknown, because it had never been officially recorded. I pressed my hand against my mouth, the weight of it crushing me. For all these years, everyone had believed Evelyn had simply vanished, but she hadn't. She had been erased. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I sat in the drawing room, staring into the dying fire. I felt watched, but not afraid anymore. If she was here, Evelyn, I wanted her to come. And she did. I saw her reflection appear in the window first, faintly outlined against the glass. Her expression wasn't angry. It was sorrowful. You know now, she said softly, though her lips never moved. I do. I whispered back. But why me? Why show me? Because you remember, she said. You were there. The fire crackled sharply, and the air shimmered like heat. Suddenly, I wasn't in the room anymore. I was somewhere else. The manor, but not as it was now. Younger. Holo, I saw her. Evelyn, standing by the staircase in a pale gown, holding Thomas's hand. They were whispering, trembling, about to leave. Then her father appeared. He wasn't shouting. His voice was cold, deliberate. He ordered the men to stop them. Thomas stepped in front of her, trying to protect her. The struggle lasted only seconds before one of the men struck him. Hard. He fell. Evelyn screamed and ran to him, clutching his body. Her father turned away, muttering something about shame and reputation. The men dragged her away as she kicked and cried. The vision blurred, faded. When I came to, I was back in the present, tears streaming down my face. I finally understood. They had killed Thomas, and to hide it, they locked her away until she vanished into madness and grief. The house had been her prison, her tomb, her echo. I stumbled through the corridors until I reached the east wing again. The piano stood waiting. The photograph and rose were still where I had left them. I placed the pendant beside them and whispered, "It's over now." But the piano began to play again, softly, mournfully, the same melody as before. Only this time it didn't feel haunted. It felt like goodbye, As the music swelled, the air grew warmer. The scent of roses filled the hall. I looked up and saw them. Faint, glowing figures, hand in hand. Evelyn and Thomas. She turned to me and smiled. "Thank you," she said. And then they faded into light. The house was silent again, but it wasn't heavy anymore. For the first time since I arrived, the sun broke through the clouds. The light fell across the cracked mirror, scattering into 1,000 tiny rainbows. I left the manor the next morning, but it never truly left me. Sometimes when I play music at night, I still feel that same warmth, as if someone's listening. And every year, when the roses bloom by my window, I think of them. Of a love so strong it refused to die. Of a house that held its breath for 80 years, waiting for someone to listen. The key, the pendant, the letters. I buried them under the old oak outside the manor, beside a small plaque I had made. It reads, "Evelyn and Thomas Hart, together at last." As I covered it with earth, I felt something shift inside me. Like I had been carrying their sorrow in my chest all along, and now it was finally free. When I walked away, I didn't look back, but the wind rustled through the trees behind me, and I could have sworn I heard a piano playing one last time. Not a song of mourning, but one of peace.